So some say getting rejected for a small business loan is practically a rite of passage for entrepreneurs, and of course this is disheartening. Rejection rates seem to be particularly high with traditional banks. Today I've invited Bongiwe Gangeni, who is the Deputy Chief Executive for Retail and Business Banking at Absa. She's going to give you tips on how you can avoid getting that dreaded decline when you do make an application for your funding. Bongiwe, thank you so much for joining us on our very first episode for 2020 of SME onPoint.
Thank you.
So tell us what you think of Zuki's story. Firstly, you've been watching with keen interest, I saw.
Fascinating. I think the first thing that stood out for me is that she's chasing her dream. And I think the most successful entrepreneurs are entrepreneurs who chase their own dreams. And I think in many instances, entrepreneurs that really do well are the ones that where the entrepreneurial idea is born from a personal need. So she talks about the fact that she wasn't sure what she would do, and she thought about the gap year concept. So it's very easy to relate to the business that she's building, and that's where you really find that entrepreneurs thrive.
In my intro there, I mentioned how some say that getting rejected for a funding or business loan is basically a rite of passage for entrepreneurs. This is where Absa comes in. I'm sure you receive thousands and thousands of applications, and you sift through them. You see those that have filled in the form correctly and have a potential of getting the funding they so desperately need, and those that just don't do it well. Take us through, the kind of trends that you've seen in who is making the applications, what type of entrepreneurs making these applications, and what common mistakes are they making?
So we get different types of entrepreneurs. Obviously, in the small business space, you still largely find that most of those entrepreneurs are largely retail oriented. That is, they are directly serving the consumer, and that's most of the individuals that we see come through the door. I think it's important to remember that the process of applying for funding doesn't start with the form that you complete as an entrepreneur. There's a process that starts before that of clearly articulating what do you want to achieve out of this business. Your earlier guests spoke about the fact that they had a dream. This is what they wanted to do. They could clearly sell. You've got to be able to sell the idea first to the funder. Actually, funding is a secondary issue. You have to convince the funder that there's a business to be heard, in what you're doing. So that's the first thing for me, being clear about what is it that you want to do. I think the second piece is that you've got to be able to show ability to repay. Now, the biggest, mistake that most SMEs make is assuming that unless you've got audited financial statements, you can't have a conversation with the bank. That's not true. All that a bank wants to see is some indication of cash flow. Now, that could be management accounts. It could be an Excel spreadsheet that you've been keeping, because I think everyone who's an entrepreneur that's running a business, there has to be some record, some track record of what sales are you making, what revenue are you generating,
what are you
where are your costs, what are you projecting. So we want to see what the cash flow looks like, because unless we can determine your ability to repay, it's very difficult for us as a funding institution to give you funding. Not only that, remember that most small businesses actually fall within the NCA Act, the National Credit Act. And so not only do we have a responsibility as a financial institution, but also from a regulatory perspective, that we're not acting as reckless lenders, and that we're giving, entrepreneurs money that they would be able to, to repay.
I know that there's a lot of entrepreneurs that I have interacted with who actually slam the banks and say they are not helping us at all. And now I'm curious about your success rates as Absa, a business bank. How many have you, say, in the past 5 years, how many of the applications have you successfully processed?
So our approval rate would vary from, year to year, but on average, we do tend to approve in the regions of about 65% to 70% of what comes through. But remember that part of the issue is that some entrepreneurs don't even make that step. So they don't approach the bank and say, I require funding. So, we can look at the statistics, but the statistic is in the context of what comes through the door. But there are a lot more, entrepreneurs that are out there that don't necessarily approach the banks because of the perceptions that they have around how the banks do business.
And also, getting money is very expensive, but we do see that yesterday the Reserve Bank did reduce interest rates base by 0.25%, that making credit a little lot cheaper. And what does this mean for entrepreneurs who already have loan commitments with banks and those who are thinking of going ahead? Does it make the process any easier now that credit is a lot less cheaper?
I think, you know, we also need to remember that one of the biggest contributors in determining pricing of a loan is the risk that the bank is taking. So when you offering credit to an entrepreneur, the conduct of that entrepreneur, not just now, but historically, is important, because that's what a bank is going to look at in determining what your risk level is. So I do think that sometimes, you know, people don't always understand that if you've had a credit record that isn't great, now that's not the only thing we look at, because we also acknowledge that historically you may have had right, you know, so we're not sort of black and white, but it's certainly something that we consider. So how you manage your finances, how you manage your business finances, and also SMEs, it's important to remember that the bank is not some strange thing that you should keep at a distance. When you get into trouble, approach the bank. Talk to us, because that allows us to have a relationship with you, but to also support you as an entrepreneur.
I'd like my colleagues to put up a sample of an application form that one would see, and I'm sure it's one that gives a lot of entrepreneurs some anxiety. I see that you have asked to give provide a breakdown of funding required, acquisition of business assets. Or take us through this one particular form.
So firstly, as a bank, we've got to make sure that the business that you are conducting is a legal business, that you are registered if you need to be registered, if you pay VAT, that you pay VAT. So really the top of that application form is really around general information, and for us to know that as a start we're engaging with a legal, entity. Then the next key part, which again entrepreneurs have to determine upfront, is what type of funding are you looking for? Working capital funding, which is really around running your day-to-day business, is very different from funding assets, and therefore you have to be clear upfront what it is that you're wanting to fund. And then the most important piece is being upfront around what your costs will be, because if you're not upfront with us, it makes very, very difficult for us to clearly articulate and understand what your need is and what your ability to repay will look like for your business. And in fact, if we give you debt that you can't afford, you're almost guaranteed that your business is going to fail. Whereas if we've got the right and appropriate information up front around your costs of running the business, what will you be spending on, it gives us a far better sense around what the business is likely to generate, and what the cash flows of that business will look like.
And of course, I can imagine that banks have someone in the bank that can help an entrepreneur when they come in to help them with the process of getting funding or a loan.
Absolutely. In our branches, we've got bankers that are there to support entrepreneurs when they come in. They support them through the process. They help them with, so you don't have to complete that application form on your own. If there's a cash flow, statement that they have to put together, we've got individuals in the branches who would be able to support with that.
Bongiwe Gangeni, the Chief Executive of Retail and Business Banking at Absa, thank you so much for joining us on SME onPoint. You've given us very valuable insight on mistakes that we could avoid when we are going to look for funding, particularly at financial institutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Just a correction, Deputy Chief Executive.
The Deputy Chief Executive, maybe the Chief Executive position is closer. But thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.